We'll be speaking to Gideon Chitanga, who is Research Associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States, University of Witwatersrand. So we'll be talking about why it's important to have the AU as a full member of the G20. As we've just mentioned, the EU is a full member. Mr. Chitanga, very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So the G20 represents over 80% of the global economy, and a significant amount of discussions, particularly at the group's yearly meetings, deeply relate to Africa. So why is the EU a full member and not the African Union?
I think the origin and the key players were centralized around the richest countries in the world. So richest countries in terms of GDP, richest countries in terms of economic growth. And because of that, the global north dominate the G20 and a few other countries outside the global north. But I think that the G20 plays probably a fundamentally dominant role in terms of global economic policy and generally key strategic issues. And the concerns about the involvement of Africa, given its role, unfortunately, based on its resource wealth and obviously the demographic basis that Africa is about 1.3 billion people, is very important. And the definition of the richest countries is problematic in the sense that it excludes other countries which contribute to the global economy in ways that are not part of the definition of the richest countries. And because of that, you find that Africa plays a very minor role. It is more dependent and peripheral in terms of policies, key policies that affect particularly global economic issues. And hence the lobby that Africa should be included in the G20. But also the key reasoning that perhaps since African countries cannot bargain independently as singular actors, it is better to have them included as the AU. I think that gives them leverage, that gives them a bigger voice, a more stronger voice, although in terms of policy that would require African countries to work on more serious, coherent convergence on key policy issues, particularly policy issues of economic continental interest.
And I mean, we'll get to the point of Africa's participation and how it's framed, but if there was wisdom enough to see, not only when the AU first attended the G20 summit in 2010, 7 years ago, the G20 compact with Africa was launched. So that was seen as something important. So what has been the role and its achievements, the measure of how to deepen G20's engagement specifically with African countries?
I think I can give a short answer that the problem is that structurally Africa continues to be seen as peripheral. The historical attitudes that forms the peripheral role that Africa plays as a continent have not changed. And until the thinking and the attitude towards the continent shifts, it will be very difficult for Africa to be really seen as a serious multilateral player. Otherwise, the continent will remain at the periphery. There are other factors with respect to the state of Africa as a continent, internal politics, to an extent internal rivalry within the continent, which diminishes the ability to influence even the smaller spaces like the spaces that would have been provided for, like you have referred to. And what at the end comes to the continent is what I can call the key global players are either happy to give to the continent. Unfortunately, in terms of how they look at the continent, we are still a peripheral continent that is more dependent, particularly on aid and minimally on our ability to compete on a global scene. either in terms of trade or in terms of influencing geopolitics, which is a major driver of the sense of global equality. Having said that, and I'm saying there are very minimal, if any, benefits to talk about since the past 7 years, except he maybe slightly increased the volumes of aid, the sense that at least key leaders can speak loudly in these global platforms. Other than that, I don't see that the continent is playing a central role. And in some cases, you see.
So let me just jump in there, Mr. Chitanga, and because I want to move the conversation along, because yes, we've belabored that, and I hear you, but this is the point that I'm trying to get to. It can't be a speak when you're spoken to situation. We acknowledge that. There must be a recognition that AU membership to the G20 is not primarily about benevolence for Africa. I mean, if we look at the fact that 64% of the EU's bauxite imports come from Guinea, 68% of cobalt and 38% of titanium from the Democratic Republic of Congo, 71% of platinum from South Africa. And Africa in itself is not just one monolithic hegemonic compound. The socio-economic and political dynamics are very different for South Africa to carry that sole responsibility of representing Africa as a whole.
You make a very important point about what Africa contributes to the global economy. But you also mentioned, I think, what I've referred to earlier in respect of internal rivalry and divisions and the sense of different states in the continent. But if you take a regional perspective, I think there are advantages of Africa speaking as a continent and bringing a cohesive voice in global platforms. I think that is an advantage. However, it needs to be reinforced through a serious convergence, intra-African convergence on key geopolitical and multilateral issues that are of interest to the continent. If we take that approach, it means Africa can raise in the G20 or the United Nations those issues that are of continental in nature, generally relevant, whether you are in South Africa or you are in Guinea or you are in the DRC. The issue, for example, of the free trade area, I think it's a key platform, just to use one example, of a space that could be used to converge, especially economic policies. And it's a process. It can be used to tackle issues of economic interest with respect to the West and other parts of the global community. If you
Mr. Chitanga, do you still have you on the line? Okay, it looks like, unfortunately, we have lost him. But that there was Gideon Chitanga. He is a research associate at the African Center for the Study of the United States, University of Witwatersrand.